And now it's time for our energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy.
Thank you for that, Julie. It looks like we've seen 7 or 8 weeks of decline in oil prices. That usually is very good news for consumers, but don't take it for granted and don't think it's going to last forever. That's a combination of factors. One, OPEC and OPEC Plus or other 23 countries didn't impress markets that are still looking for excuses to say that demand continues to drop. Whether it drops short term or long term, the reality is that the entire structure of oil exploration is being underfunded, and I might add, particularly in Canada's case, attacked. Yes, we have a minister of environment showing off and showboating over in Dubai. I'm sure he swam to get there. Now, of course, saying that we have to put yet more caps on emissions from an industry that is clearly one of the cleanest in the world in terms of emission. And I don't just mean one CO2, which isn't a pollutant, by the way. But I'm talking about pollution, methane, and other things. The Canadian oil and natural gas sector has been the world leader in diminishing its output, and of course, it produces something that countries like the United States, despite the trendies down there, need. They need our heavy oil. Otherwise, they have to go to places like Venezuela on bended knee. That'll be the same regime that is now threatening Guyana, which has basically decided to issue arrest warrants for the opposition. I think Americans really have to smarten up on this. Canadians, of course, is a foregone conclusion. They're okay with 3 carbon taxes. So we have the one, Clean Fuel Standard, which is now implemented in places like Atlantic Canada and British Columbia, will be visited by the rest of the country. We have the existing carbon tax, which will go to 37.43 cents a liter by 2030, and now a cap on emissions. And what that really means is it's a cap on production. You're basically saying to the number one economic engine in this country, we don't want you to produce any more oil. And if you do, we want you to either spend a lot of money on sequestration, something called CCUS, carbon capture and underground storage. That's very expensive. The federal government is not stepping up to the plate to actually improve that. Provinces out in the West have already started that regardless. But it means that we could be seeing anywhere from a 15 to 20 cent addition. So let's put it in perspective. By 2030, if the Liberals and their friends in the NDP are successful, you can see a scenario playing out, direct increase in gas prices of 80 cents a liter and close to $1 for diesel. You'll also see a flight of capital out of the country as many of these companies simply don't comply, or they go to the carbon credit market. Either way, you as a consumer are going to be stuck, and it's going to affect not just energy prices. Let's talk food. Let's talk the cost of living. Let's talk about the productivity in this country. So while that's way beyond the issue of gasoline price prediction, the reality is that when you fool around with energy prices and you make an energy resource country like Canada ultimately vulnerable by woke ideas coming from our federal government, our coalition government, it affects you and it affects I in ways that we can't possibly calculate. A few years ago, the concept of affordable energy wasn't given much thought. Many of you now are having second thoughts, and you know that the pain is very real and it's going to get a whole lot worse. What that means, of course, is that while we look at what's happening internationally, what we're doing domestically is having a detrimental effect on the impact on the price of gas. That's because our Canadian dollar is trading at about a 1/3 to 40% discount to the U.S. greenback. Why is that important? Well, food prices, energy prices, take your pick, are all priced in U.S. dollars. And when you're not selling anything the world wants, your Canadian dollar takes a bit of an impact, a hit. And then not only are you looking at inflation as a result of that hidden, inflationary effect, the weak Canadian dollar versus the U.S. greenback, you have governments larding on ever more taxes in order to virtue signal and pretend that carbon taxes can somehow be a control knob that will change the weather. Gasoline prices for this week are going to go back up a little bit. We've seen them drop about 5 cents a liter on average across the country. That's probably as good as it's going to get. Colder weather is coming. The end of the year may have, some hedgers in the international market saying, "Oh, we need more evidence of demand destruction and more evidence of supply crunch before we make a decision." This whole thing is going to be swept over very quickly, especially after the GabFest, the Climate Weather GabFest in Dubai, which I think the president quite rightly showed out. The president of the COP, is Sultan Al Jaber, when he called the ideas of climate change a little questionable and said that the policies of destroying the fossil fuels industry would send us all living caves. I don't disagree with them, but I think it's going to have an impact on Canadians for the long term. This week, look for prices to go back up maybe 3 or 4 cents a liter. And next week, more specifically, look for them to once again rise just that much more. That's it for this week, Julie, and we'll talk to you next week.